So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the Green Leaf Forward. I don't really intend to make this a political channel. It's not really more of a political channel, it's more of a spiritual channel, more of a philosophy type of thing. There's a lot more theories, more engagement, but there are ultimately a lots of overlaps in, you know, with politics and thinking about motherism and thinking about the planet. So, one of the first things I want to talk about is how the Green Leaf Forward is challenging us to really begin to examine what does it mean to be human, right? What does it mean to be a part of a whole? Because more oftentimes than not, we kind of see ourselves as separate the from the world. We see ourselves as separate or independent of nature. And with the climate bubble and the climate collapse and the Green Leaf Forward, that we're able to then think about what does it mean to be human again. When it comes to the concept of the oversoul, one of the things I really like about that concept is that this idea that we're all interconnected, that supersedes gender, that supersedes race, that supersedes class, nation, and all these other elements. The overview effect is usually what astronauts have when they kind of return back to Earth. And I think that that is kind of the direction that society, that the humanity is actually going to be going, be, be leaning into, because that this is going to be something that's going to ultimately affect and shape our futures of humanity and what we have to do then as a collective, as a people. So there's two things that I know about the climate crisis. The bad news is that the climate crisis is very, very important and urgent, and it needs to be addressed immediately. And if we don't address it, there are consequences for it, and it will ultimately get worse. The good news is that we still have time to fix it, and there are ways for us to begin to mitigate the effects of climate change and create a degree of homeostasis and balance. And then afterwards, we then just focus on living well and advancing technology. So I say that it's more of a Green Leaf Forward as opposed to a Green New Deal, because we just need to update some elements of our society, starting with our farming system. So, as opposed to, for example, as opposed to monocropping, we would then adopt agroforestry and syntropic farming, where we're able to then not only incorporate have more yields, but we will also have cleaner meat in the process. So to kind of picture what agroforestry would look like, instead of going to a farm and seeing a long row of corn, for example, what farming would look like in the Anthropocene would be trees, right? Rows of different fruit trees, and then there would be crops that would then be grown in between that, these fruit trees. The reason why you would do that is because the trees will ultimately prevent soil degradation and soil erosion, which takes millions of years to actually develop and form. And we would ultimately have cleaner, we would have more yields, that we will be able to have healthier foods. Also, the rows of trees would help to mitigate the effects of climate change. They could begin to clean up our atmosphere and soak up some of that CO2 out of the atmosphere. And we can ultimately replenish biodiversity and re-strengthen biodiversity. Also, you can intersperse not only the trees and the crops, but you can create a silvopastry, which is kind of um, have a more of a pastoral element to it as well, where you can ultimately have raise your livestock on these sort of farms within this sort of regenerative farming framework, which then produces cleaner meat. So, as opposed to having meat that is ran through the system of capitalism and it leads to recalls of meat, like what we just experienced with the outbreak that just recently happened, that we would ultimately have cleaner meat. And we could have, and because it will be surrounded on, because it will be, within the framework of agroforestry, that it wouldn't matter how much, how many cows we have, because we also immediately know that one of the reasons why one of the biggest contributors to climate change is the methane that a lot of these cows produce. But if we do implement a system to where we intersperse that with trees and create agroforestry, that ultimately wouldn't be a problem anymore.